Hello everybody, it is April 11th, 2025 here in the United States of America. Finally starting to feel a bit better. I'm not going to be coughing my brains out in this video and struggling to get through it, and also things are going to be a little more... I listened to the last video and I feel like I rambled a bit about certain things, didn't make the points that I felt like I should make. So actually I'm going to talk about the same subject today that I talked about in my last video. And by the way, the video has over 600 views now, which I'm very surprised by. Thanks to everyone who watched the video and liked it and left a comment. But I'm going to elaborate a bit more on what I mentioned in that previous video about political pragmatism. That was just something on the fly to make sure that I put a video out and stuck with the schedule. But in this one, I'm going to elaborate a bit on what I meant. Maybe I wasn't completely clear on a few things. I wanted to give specific examples when I talked about the lack of pragmatism and governing within the Western countries. I felt I was a little vague with some of the things that I mentioned. And in this video, I'm going to go into some specifics on what I did mean when I say that the West is governed by emotion and ideology over any kind of pragmatic governing or sense of managing a country based upon what actually historically works and what doesn't work. When governing a nation, I feel the chief concern of those governing should be, are the people well taken care of? Are the people happy? Is the country stable socially? Is the country militarily capable of defending itself? Is the citizenry, are they willing to fight and take up arms to defend the nation if need be? Is that something that my people would even be capable of doing if the need arose? Because historically, people that don't want to fight for their kings or their leaders do so because they don't like their kings and they don't like their leaders and they feel like they're doing a very, very bad job. If you look at, I saw a chart that actually showed what percentage of the population of each country listed would be willing to fight to defend that country, and the numbers in Western Europe were pretty low. I think many of them were sub 35%, sub 30%. Germany was pretty bad. The UK was pretty bad. France was pretty low. And there's a reason for that, because all of these countries are very, very poorly governed, and the morale of the common people, the working class men and women of those countries, the morale is plummeting through the floor, and there's a reason for that. Very impractical and terrible governing, because, again, as I mentioned before, people in the West, our ruling class, are far more concerned with passing policies that line up with their ideology and wishful thinking over policies that actually would benefit their nations as a whole. One prime example I want to talk about in regards to this is something that happens here in the United States with the state of California. Now, in the United States, our states aren't like provinces. They function more as semi-independent nation states. It's a pretty interesting system. Each state has their own national guard, their own governor, which is, essentially like a mini president, if you will. And states can be governed very differently from one another. The state which I live in, Ohio, is governed much differently than the state of California. In California, the state government, mostly thanks to Gavin Newsom and a great number of ideologically possessed judges and senators, they routinely pass laws that are baffling. If you're looking at what they're doing from the standpoint of, okay, what do I need? What kind of laws should be passed to ensure the prosperity of the people living in California? What laws should be passed that mitigate homelessness, that mitigate poverty, that mitigate social unrest, that mitigate natural disasters happening California is very prone to wildfires and earthquakes. Also, California is a coastal state. The chances of a tsunami hitting California, because it's located on the Ring of Fire, the Pacific Ring of Fire, around the tectonic plate that makes up most of the Pacific Ocean or the region around it. It's very prone to natural disasters. So are these policies in line to ensure a quick response to natural disasters, to prevent the ones that are somewhat preventable? And when you look at California, almost every single law that's passed doesn't address any of these issues. You have laws now on the books that are causing crime to increase throughout the state. I think you have to steal a certain dollar amount of items. I want to say it's close to $1,000 to actually be charged, I believe, with a felony. So the incentive to stop people from stealing isn't there. You have multiple businesses that can no longer function in some cities because they're losing too much merchandise. And there's this ideology behind passing laws like this. The idea that there should be no prisons, the idea that police forces aren't necessary to govern a nation. We must all truly be free. People should live as they please. You can't arrest anybody because if you arrest the wrong people, it can be misconstrued as enforcing some kind of ethnocentric. It's kind of hard to even really describe this. They call it whiteness. It's the enforcement of white supremacy or whiteness, which in the United States, when they say those things, it usually just ends up meaning don't enforce any kind of common. Don't put anything in place that would enforce a framework of rules that would ensure having a stable, common sense society, as if people that aren't of Western European descent don't live in societies where there's police officers and rules and laws and consequences for breaking those laws. It's really funny when you look into it, this idea that they have where having a police force itself is like some kind of enforcement mechanism for this vague idea of whiteness, historical white supremacy, Western colonialism, or something along those lines. As if, again, if you travel to East Asia, if you travel to Africa, if you travel to the Middle East, basically if you travel anywhere where there's not European people, you don't have societies that function like that. It's very strange and very silly. Again, it's an idea that's not really rooted in any kind of historical or political reality at all. But anyways, getting back to what the consequences are for this law is rampant crime. If you were trying to have a stable if you're trying to have a stable and healthy society, why would you pass laws that do the opposite of that? Again, because these people are guided by ideology. They know what kind of society they want. They think they can create that society, and they're not really concerned about the consequences of the real world consequences of their own people of passing these laws. Again, they have this long bumpy road that they want to go down. At the end of it is paradise, and to get to paradise, you have to break a few things. It's the motivation behind creating the Soviet Union. Yeah, this might be horrific at first, and a lot of people might die, and you have to force people into collective farms, and people lose their rights, and a lot of people get shot. But at the end of that road is paradise. Well, at the end of that road, there wasn't paradise. At the end of that road, there was 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union and the birth of the Russian Federation and the abandonment of most of the tenets of communism. That was the end of the road. It failed. And again, this giant social experiment taking place in California is also going to fail as well. Again, if you were Gavin Newsom and you were concerned about keeping your own citizens safe from crime, then you would never support laws that would actually increase the crime rate. I think what they want to do is they want to arrest less people. I guess arresting less people means having a better society because there's less people in prison. I guess it feels good to not throw so many people in jail. I think the motivation for that is, well, we have a lot of disadvantaged communities in California, and there's a disproportionate number of them being arrested. So therefore, if we just pass laws making it harder to charge people with crimes, then I guess the social tensions that have always been around those communities dating back, decades, dating back to the LA riots and the beating of Rodney King. If we just arrest less of those people, then there'll be less social tension, and then we'll just have a better society. Well, it's not a realistic policy at all. Unfortunately, that seems like it would have the opposite effect if you don't enforce your laws and arrest fewer people. I mean, if you have unjust laws in the books that result in people going to jail needlessly, that's one thing. But if people are actually committing violent crimes or crimes in general or victimizing people, then yeah, those people have to be arrested. There has to be some kind of punishment mechanism in place, or else it incentivizes people to do it more. And it actually hurts those communities in the long run. Okay, so what happens if somebody in one of those communities, like the African American or Asian or Hispanic communities, goes to open a business up and they can't because half their merchandise just got stolen? How did you help that community? You didn't. Again, because these people are more concerned about, well, this law made me feel good, so therefore I passed it. And it's not just issues with crime. It's many of these laws, too, increase rates of homelessness, drug addiction. Legalizing and making it easier to get extremely addictive drugs is a terrible idea, and this is one of the biggest problems I have with libertarians in general. When it comes to things like opiates, like, oh yeah, just make drugs readily available. Don't ban anything. Let people do what they want, and everything will be great. The people that say that, I don't think have ever been around somebody that's addicted to opiates. Opiates are evil. Opiates will change who you are. They'll turn people that are borderline saints into fiends overnight once they're addicted. No, I'm sorry. You cannot have a healthy society if everyone are using opiates. You just can't. So if you legalize heroin, you make it easy to get, you make it socially acceptable to do heroin, to do opiates. I live in Appalachia. Believe me, I've seen the consequences of rampant opiate use. Okay, if I really wanted to get Vicodin or OxyContin or heroin, believe me, it's not easy to get. I could go a few miles up the road and probably find some. Now, the people that sell that stuff should be arrested and face harsh penalties for what that stuff does to the people they sell it to. It's horrific. You don't want to make that kind of stuff socially acceptable to use, but in states like California, Washington, and Oregon, they've backpedaled a little bit, I think, recently, but making those drugs readily available and not levying harsh penalties against the people that peddle them or sell them results in horrific things. I've known quite a few people that have died from drug overdoses, family members, friends, acquaintances and whatnot. It's horrific. Why would you wish that upon your own people? Just so you feel good about things. Well, this ideology that I have says people should do as they please, they should do what they want, your body, your choice, if you want to do drugs, liberation, and it ends in absolute horror. I've seen it firsthand. It's not pretty. That stuff should be expunged from the earth. I think medically, opiates should be banned, and we should find a better alternative for pain medication. That stuff should be destroyed. I hate it. It's a scourge upon this planet. But anyways, why would you pass laws, again, making it easier for people to do those things and sell those things? Look at how many homeless people, or just people in general, passed out in the streets from injecting drugs, from doing drugs. Why would you want to exacerbate that problem? Why would you? And I don't think those people are terrible people. Many of those people are victims. But why would you want to pass laws that increase the number of people that end up in a situation like that if you actually care about governing your society in a reasonable manner? And then also, too, you have the environmental stuff as well. And this is one of the biggest problems with the environmental lobby I have in this country. Now, I consider myself more or less an environmentalist. I hate pollution. I live in one of the most beautiful regions of the country, and I don't want to see it destroyed. Strip mining is terrible. I am not a big fan of the amount of fracking that we do around here. I'm not a fan of water pollution. I don't live very far from East Palestine. That was terrible too. But one of the biggest problems that you have with the environmentalists in the United States is, they talk about saving the planet, but then when you offer them real-world pragmatic solutions, like they're so wrapped up in their ideology that they can't accept those proposals and solutions. But with nuclear energy, for example, nuclear energy is extremely safe statistically. You would, again, if a country were to fully invest in nuclear energy in a safe and efficient manner, emissions would be cut drastically. Coal fire plants, you could do away with them. But in places like California, their solution is solar and wind. Sounds great on paper, makes you feel good to say, until you realize you just had to cut down hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres of forest to put in a solar farm. Okay, or you have to inundate an entire coastline with wind farms. It looks terrible and it harms the wildlife. Again, not real world solutions. When it comes to things like fire prevention, for example, we don't want to waste a bunch of water because water's precious. Okay, so don't fill the reservoirs. And what happens then when a fire breaks out? We'll figure it out. And then when the fire does inevitably break out, because we also didn't clear the brush, because we don't want to harm the forest, then we can just conveniently blame global warming. Well, okay, how many people are dead now and how many homes are destroyed? Again, if you really cared about your people, you would put the environmental ideology aside and do the things necessary to prevent large fires from spreading. Fire breaks, clearing brush, practical solutions to real-world problems. But instead of doing this, they wait for the disaster to happen, and then they, again, because of their ideology, they can simply blame climate change. So instead of taking realistic, real-world measures to mitigate the effects of fairly preventable natural disasters, the ideology comes first. Again, like California is one of the prime examples of a state being governed solely upon, I hate even to say progressive, because a lot of progressives have broken rank with these kinds of, like Jimmy Dore, for example. Jimmy Dore would advocate for fairly common sense solutions for many of the problems in California. And I would say he's an actual progressive. So I don't want to say progressives. I just want to say, neoliberal, globalist ideologues. I mean, essentially they're just very naive, foolish people that don't understand how to govern anything in a realistic and pragmatic manner. They're not fit to be in power. But that's one example, a really good example, I think, that people can look at. Just look at how California is governed. Also, you have the effects of this is a big one. This is a really big one right here. What I'm about to mention: letting illegal aliens vote. Okay, no borders. Everyone, no one is illegal. We don't have any borders. Everyone's free to come and go as they please. If you're even like a resident somewhere, you should be allowed to vote. That is an insane policy. You would have to think of the consequences of it, though. Say you do that. Okay, you have your native population, if you will, the people that are already citizens, the people that live in an area and have their entire lives invested in an area. Okay, they vote. They're the ones that make the call. They're the taxpayers. It is incredibly naive to think that you can ship in tens of thousands of people from another country who aren't citizens, allow them to vote in local elections, and then expect the people already living there, whose votes are now being cast aside, essentially, by the votes of a bunch of people who aren't actually citizens, who aren't paying, aren't necessarily even paying taxes, or aren't invested in the region, who don't have roots in the area. They can come in and just vote, and you'll have a stable society. People won't get mad about that. You won't have some kind of rebellion eventually over that. You just disenfranchised half your population, if not more, again, to placate a fairly small group of ideologues. No sane king, emperor, president, or whoever would govern a region like this. Like, you would purposefully import a bunch of people that aren't citizens and allow them to vote, and then expect your population not to get angry with you, not to rebel, not to become not to become discontented over time with the events that they're seeing. It's just it's ridiculous. It's insane. All that kind of stuff is going to backfire. Because as I mentioned before, the most important part, and I keep saying this over and over again, is the ideology. It's not the governance, it's the ideology. And the sad part too is many of these people, these globalists, I'm trying to find a good word to describe them. I hate when people call them communists because I don't think they're communists. I think even Marxists and Leninists had more common sense than these people, which is sad to say. There's something else entirely. I mean, I'll just say neoliberal globalists. We'll just call them that. This is just how they govern. If you look at Europe, for example, Western Europe, you look at somebody like Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is beating the drums of war to rally, a coalition of the willing against Russia. Meanwhile, there's massive discontent within the country that he's currently governing because of the refugee and immigration policies that the UK government has had for decades now. It's finally backfiring. You have a very large segment of your population that's furious over it, and instead of addressing them in a manner that could quell them and calm them down, they just inflame them more and more and more. Call them bigots, racists. They've even started arresting some of them because of a legitimate concern that they have. Again, because the neoliberal globalist cause comes before all else. If you look at I'm jumping around a lot here, but if you look at the British military, it's very small. It could fit inside of a sports stadium, essentially, all branches. And anybody who is governing from a realistic standpoint would not be trying to pick a fight with one of the world's three preeminent powers. If your military could fit inside of a soccer stadium, why is Keir Starmer doing this? Again, these people are completely detached from reality, completely and totally detached from reality. They're possessed with their ideology. They really do believe that they're finally creating a perfect system, a Star Trek utopia on Earth, if you will, and they have a righteous cause, and this is what they believe. That comes before all else. And if the people that it's harming when they voice their discontent, the way they look at it as well, these people aren't worth listening to because they're relics of the past, and they'll die off soon enough, and we don't need to listen to them. Well, they're not going to die off. They're going to grow in numbers until they overthrow you, and that's how it is going to end up being across the West. That's kind of what happened in the United States with the re-election of Donald Trump. If you look at the numbers, he won all the swing states and the popular vote. Why did this happen? Again, the ideology of the current American Democratic Party was rejected on the federal level. People grew tired of what was being pushed from 2008 onwards. People are finally sick of it. Governing from this ideological standpoint, governing the way that these people have governed since then, is not something people are happy with. They've rejected it across the country completely. And yet, if you look at the position of American Democrats, they are doubling down on almost all of their positions. All of them. Again, because the ideology comes first and foremost above all else. They don't care about sound tax policy. They don't care about sound immigration policy. All they care about is passing what makes them feel good. They don't care if their policies lead to the castration of children. They don't care if their policies lead to complete social chaos and anarchy. It doesn't matter. The consequences don't matter. What matters is passing laws that align with their worldview and what they believe. And this is what I was talking about in the previous video. This has possessed the Western world, from Canada and the United States to Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand. It's permeated, and I hate to say it like Western civilization as if it's one civilization. And I don't believe that. I believe the Western world has a lot of things in common, to say it's one civilization, I think it's a bit silly, especially since we've been slaughtering each other for hundreds of years. But we do share some cultural things in common and historical things in common, and it's something that has permeated across Western countries is this complete lack of pragmatism and governing from an ideological standpoint. Like I said, that's why I mentioned California. If you look at the laws that are on the books in California, the things being passed and proposed are going to do nothing but exacerbate all the problems that they have. And anyone from the outside looking in can clearly see that, which is why so many people are leaving the state. Western Europe, same thing. All these countries are being governed, again, from an ideological standpoint, and none of the concerns and serious problems that these countries have internally are being addressed and are ever going to be addressed by these people until they have a full-on disaster on their hands, and by then it's going to be far too late. But anyways, I think I'm going to end the video here. I just wanted to elaborate a bit more and go into some specifics on what I was talking about in that last video. I did feel like I was a little vague about certain things. But anywho, I will be posting another video tomorrow. I hope everyone out there has a great day, and see you then.